Hi everyone, and welcome to our QCE Business Units 3 and 4 lecture for today. Thank you for coming along. My name is Jess, but before I tell you a little bit more about me and we get into our content for today, I want to tell you a little bit about ATAR Notes for those of you who aren't familiar with us. So ATAR Notes started back in 2007, and since then we've been offering lots of free resources for students, and one of those offerings is this lecture series. So we've been doing the lectures since 2015 and we have them throughout the year. So be sure to check back in for our next lecture series in July as well. And in addition to the lectures, we have lots of other resources as well. So you can check out our website at atarnotes.com and you'll find there study notes, discussions, videos, articles, ATAR calculators, and lots more. So I encourage you to visit that if any of those sound good to you. And we also have another offering that's newer, which is ATAR Notes Plus. And here you'll find lots of different resources that are covering a whole range of different subjects. So you, for example, can see in the image there, we've got the QCE Business 3 and 4 complete course notes that I wrote for the cohort. And you'll find study notes for all of the other subjects that you may be studying as well. Those are something that I accessed for subjects like English back when I was at school, and I encourage you to do the same if you want a little bit of a leg up for your assignments and exams. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about me and then we'll start on our content for today. So as I mentioned, my name is Jess. I graduated in 2020, so it's been a few years now. And I'm currently studying communication and journalism at the University of Queensland. So that's a dual degree, 4 years. So I'm in my final year now. And I love reading and writing. So all of the humanities subjects at school were my favorites. I really enjoyed English and accounting and legal studies in addition to business as well. Okay, so let's get into our lecture schedule and see what is to come. So we're going to be covering Unit 4, Topic 1 today, which you may be about to do at school or you may be doing in the coming months. It depends on how your school is structuring the work. Some schools start year 12 in year 11 and some wait until the new year to start those units 3 and 4, the content for those. So we're looking in this unit at the post-maturity stage. You will have been going through the different stages throughout your years studying business. We started back looking at the seed stage and the startup stage in units 1 and 2, and we were looking at the growth stage, and now we're on to we were looking, at the maturity stage after that, and then post-maturity is where we're up to now in Unit 4. We're also going to have a look at what happens to businesses in that stage. We're thinking about exit strategies, strategies for repositioning to try and counteract that decline, and then also the different tools that you'll need for your assignment for this particular unit. So you'll have analytical tools and evaluating criteria like always, a decision-making matrix that you'll need to know how to do, and we'll look at an overview of the IA3 and an example as well to get you started. Okay, without further ado, let's have a look at the post-maturity stage. So what is this stage? This is when a business is experiencing a consistent decrease in sales or a reduced demand from the market. So it's exactly following on from maturity. Maturity was all about having that plateau, that sense of being at the top of the market in the industry that the business is operating in. In post maturity, it's not as stable as that, but there are the three different outcomes. So when you're in post maturity, you can continue up by renewing the business and then continuing on the trajectory upwards. We can also have a steady state where nothing really happens. And then we've got decline as well, where businesses are going to think about downsizing or closing completely because of, um, like we saw, reduced demand, reduced sales, those sorts of things. So let's have a look at these in more detail. So in the steady state, the business may consider themselves in the maturity stage. So we could see in that previous diagram that it was essentially just a flat line. So they may not even see themselves as being in post maturity. It's a bit of a gray area in terms of some of these distinctions. And so they may have experienced a slight decline when they're in the steady state, but the business is still remaining viable. And they may stop pursuing growth once they're satisfied with their objectives. So they're happy with that steady stage that they're in. They're not really looking to continue to grow because that would involve bringing in those renewal strategies that we'll look at shortly as well. So attributes of the steady state. We've got maintaining day-to-day customs. We've got owner content with financial performance. So again, they're not looking at growing further. They don't want to get more customers, and of course, they're not going to bring in more employees either. And that also means that maybe if employees leave, if they're retiring or resigning to move on to other positions, maybe they won't be replaced. And since they are in a steady state, they may perceive any change to be negative because they want things to remain the same so they can remain in that steady state. So Woolworths and Coles would most likely not be considered post-mature businesses because they are still at the top of their industries. They're not really in that post-maturity phase. And the reason for that is they use those repositioning strategies to make sure they're constantly at the top of their game. And so that is helping them to make sure that they don't enter decline. And decline is where you're going to have a reduction in sales or demand for products and services. You may try to downsize by reducing employee numbers or not offering as many products or services. And it can be caused by lots of different factors, which we'll have a look at shortly as well. So when you're in decline, you're going to not have that steadiness in terms of revenue. So of course that means difficulty with meeting financial obligations. And again, that idea of not replacing departing employees, that can happen in the steady state and it can also happen in decline. And they're not going to probably look at so much marketing. If they're in decline, they are going to be looking at potentially exit strategies, depending on how sort of bad the decline is. So let's have a look at an example or two. So Revlon is a cosmetics company and it filed for bankruptcy in the US in June 2022. So that is an example of a strategy that a business is going to use to exit or the market. So when a company is not able to continue anymore, sometimes they are forced to file for bankruptcy. Another example is Target. So back in 2020, in the period of COVID, when that first came about, Wesfarmers, the parent company, announced that 75 Target stores would be closed and 92 would be converted into Kmart. and Kmart was doing far better at the time. So trying to appeal to consumers by going for what they were looking for. People wanted Kmart for the lower price point and that kind of thing. So they were responding to that market demand. So let's have a look now at internal, operating, and macro factors. So some examples that may lead to decline in each of these categories. First of all, let's have a look at what each of these mean. So you can think of these different categories as sort of being like a house of sorts. So your internal is all the people and things that are going on inside of the house. You've got the owners and managers and the employees. So you can also think of it like a business, all the people inside, and then part of that is also the structure, the building structure and the culture of how all of those people work together and what that situation is like. So that's internal. Operating is more of sort of the outside, I suppose, where it is the walls of the building. You've got customers, competitors, suppliers, and interest groups. So all of the different people who make the business go around. You've got all of those people who are going to be influencing decisions and the way that the business can operate. Because if a competitor does something, then you need to monitor that and you need to make sure you're not falling behind. Suppliers impact operations because you're reliant on them for making sure you've got stock for whatever it is that you sell. And of course, customers, you rely on them to keep your business moving. And macro is the big things that are sort of out floating around in the air. You've got your STEEPLE acronym, which you may be familiar with all of the analytical tools that you've done before. So it stands for sociocultural, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, and ethical. So all of those different things that can be going on in the business environment that are going to have some kind of impact. So now if we look at examples that lead to decline, potentially, in terms of internal, you may have poor quality employees and customer service, and that is going to then lead to poor customer satisfaction and potential reputational damage. And all of this has a flow-on effect to potentially mean the business will decline. And keep in mind that there's different levels of this. So yes, a business may have poor quality employees, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're in decline. It's sort of how bad it is that's going to determine whether they actually are going to decline as a result. There are plenty of businesses out there that that have lots of complaints that people aren't happy with, but they still generate enough revenue to continue operating as is, and they haven't entered that decline phase. You also may have not adapting leadership and management styles to suit the business's needs. That can impact as well. And we'll have a look at an example in a moment that may relate to that. Now, operating environmental factors, you could fail to monitor competitors. Like I mentioned before, that's really important to make sure you're not falling behind in the market. And if you don't do that, then you potentially will not have that level of innovation, that level of meeting the demands of customers, and that could then result in decline. And also not pursuing suppliers with the best cost efficiency. So you don't want to rest on your laurels with suppliers, just continue with the same supplier without monitoring the market and looking at options that may be better than what you've currently got. And so failing to do that could mean a business is going to go into decline. Also, keep in mind that some of these things may sort of join together to result in decline. It's not always going to be one thing, because, for example, not monitoring competitors or not pursuing suppliers with the best pricing doesn't really sound like a big enough deal to result in a whole established business collapsing. And it probably wouldn't be. It would be a range of different things that may lead to that decline. But these are just examples of some of the things that may be in the mix with what's having that impact. Now, macro environmental factors, a classic example that you probably can think of yourself is COVID-19. So heaps of businesses went into administration back in 2020 and beyond that as well, because of the changes that resulted from COVID-19. So not being able to travel, and all those sorts of things had huge impacts on businesses like Flight Centre, for example, and the different airlines. Those are really clear examples there. A few other examples. So in terms of internal, Twitter, or now it's called X, they had some problems back when Elon Musk took over, and you could consider that sort of internal things that led to decline. So the business may not have continued to decline, but it's probably not as strong as it used to be. So the different things that went into that, owners and managers. So the way that the management style was happening, they laid off lots of different employees. They were demanding more from employees, wanting people to work longer hours and those sorts of things. And then I guess those things have an impact then on organizational structure with the way that the employee hierarchy is set out, and then the culture as well. Getting rid of employees without sort of looking after them, without having the sort of things that you would expect with the way that that is done, can impact the culture, and then the structure where you are putting more of a burden on existing employees because of getting rid of lots of other employees. It's all going to impact the structure and the culture, and those things can all come together to potentially result in the business declining. A macro example, PwC, which is a financial consultancy kind of company in Australia. It had a bit of a scandal last year in that it had some issues with the different practices that it was carrying out in that finance kind of sector, and that resulted in some legal, political, and ethical issues around that. And I believe that in 2023 it had a huge decline in its accounting sector, for example, something like $125 million lost in revenue compared to the previous year. So those are some examples that we may be familiar with in terms of decline. Now let's have a look at exit options. So if the business continues to decline and it's not able to reestablish itself in the industry, then it may choose to exit. So companies that are insolvent, which means they can't meet their financial obligations on time, they have two exit options. So voluntary administration or involuntary administration. So voluntary administration involves the business appointing an administrator to examine the business's financial situation and the options that they have available to them moving forward. So an administrator can be engaged by the company or can be ordered by the court to fulfill the role. And an administrator is always someone who's a third party. So they're independent and they're registered. And so you're not going to have any conflict of interest with them being part of the business and having any kind of biases towards the business in favor or against. So some examples of businesses that have had some struggles over recent years and have had that experience with voluntary administration. We've got Dick Smith, Jeans West, Virgin Australia, and QCE. So we know, of course, that, for example, Virgin is still operating now, but it did go into voluntary administration and it had to be bought out by an overseas company, I believe. And equally, Jeans West is still operating, but they also went into voluntary administration. And so let's have a look now at the comparison. This is about voluntarily appointing that administrator, and in comparison, involuntary administration, just as it sounds, is going to involve creditors. So those people who the business owes the money to. They seek or obtain a court order for the company's financial position to be investigated by an administrator. So you'll find that voluntary administration is more common. Usually it would be more likely that the business would recognize its own position and appoint an administrator themselves rather than being forced into it like this by creditors. If you think about reputational damage, it's probably better for a business reputationally to do it voluntarily because it shows that they have that awareness of their situation and that they want to get the best outcome for any shareholders or customers that they may have. Whereas involuntary administration may be seen as not taking responsibility for the business's situation and forcing creditors to take action themselves instead. So some outcomes of these two types of administration, voluntary and involuntary. So a deed of company arrangement is something I believe Virgin Australia went into. So this is a binding agreement between company and creditors. So binding means that it's legally binding. You have to stick to the agreement. It's not just a casual kind of agreement that could be broken. So an agreement between the company and the creditors, the people who are owed the money, that details how the business's finances will be handled until those liabilities are repaid. So a majority of the company's creditors must vote in favor of a deed of company arrangement. So it's that voting system to make sure that a majority of the creditors are satisfied with the decision that they've come to. Now, liquidation is something that happened with Dick Smith. So you still may see Dick Smith around the name of the business, and that's because the assets of the company were sold, and so someone else now owns those, and that's why we still see that name around. So assets are sold at discounted rates, and the resulting profits from those sales are distributed to creditors in preparation for the company's closure. So you have got those assets and you're going to make the most of them by trying to sell them off. And with that money, you're going to um, try and pay off as much as you can of what you owe. So again, you've got this idea that it's got to be the majority in favor. So the creditors have to vote in favor of that liquidation strategy. Now, recommencing operations is not something that we see very often. Once a business has gone into voluntary or involuntary administration, it usually goes one of the two ways that we've just gone through, but recommencing could be an option as well. So the administrator who is doing the investigation may return control to the directors. So this means that the administrator has deemed that the business is fit to continue, and it's rare though because the business would need to have that evidence to show that it can recover from the financial issues and it can make all of those pay all of those creditors the money that they're owed and meet those financial obligations. So let's have a look at some key business functions and the repositioning strategies that fall under each of them. So there are 4 key business functions that you'll need to know, and they are the processes within human resources, finance, marketing, and operations carried out to meet business objectives and goals. So with finance, of course, it's all about money. So you're looking at profitability, growth, and liquidity. Those are the objectives that you have in the finance function. Now, an example of a finance repositioning strategy may be implementing a credit policy to encourage credit customers to pay on time. This is something that comes up a lot in accounting if you do accounting at school as well. So if we have people who owe us money, so customers who have purchased something on credit and they owe us money, we want to incentivize them to give us that money in a timely manner. We don't want them to become bad debts, which means that they will are not going to pay us, and the money that we're owed, we're never going to get that back. So this is about making sure that not only you get the money back at some stage, but you also get it on time. So credit customers have that period where they should be paying you. It shouldn't be taking months and months and months usually. So a credit policy can incentivize that on-time payment. It could involve giving discounts to people if they pay earlier. It could also involve penalties if they pay late. So charging interests on late payments, for example. And then also part of a credit policy can be looking at the creditworthiness of customers before you actually offer the credit to begin with. Because if they don't have a good credit record, they usually don't pay on time, or they usually don't pay at all, then perhaps you don't want to offer them credit to begin with. Now, human resources, this is all about people. So human resources repositioning strategies are all about the employment cycle. So that consists of acquisition, getting your employees, development, so training the employees up to be fit for the role, maintenance, so making sure they are up to date. Training is usually an ongoing process in any business. And then separation, if the employees do end up leaving, then that's when they separate from the business. So some human resources repositioning strategies could be changing the interview and recruitment process. So maybe there are ways that that can be streamlined or improved in some way. I know in recent years we've had companies like Woolworths are using artificial intelligence to do the recruitment process now. So instead of having phone calls and in-person meetings to determine who will be hired and who won't be, you've got AI technologies that are helping with that instead. So the the whole interview process would go through an online system, and the AI would help to make that a lot faster and to save the business money. And another potential strategy, offering rewards to employees. So if you want to reposition, then maybe you want a better reputation with the way that you pay your employees. Maybe you want to keep them satisfied. So giving those bonuses and those pay increases can ensure that that happens. If you want to avoid separation where employees go elsewhere, those can be good strategies to ensure that they are incentivized to stay. Now, our last two key business functions, we've got marketing. So, market repositioning is all about appealing to a new or wider market. So, you can rebrand, you could alter your promotional strategies, or you could even expand your range of products or services to capture that wider demographic, that wider audience. So maybe you would seek celebrity endorsements, for example. That's something that we see all the time now with social media influencers and things like that. So that's a market repositioning strategy in that marketing function. Keep in mind that some of these strategies can also be used even if the business isn't repositioning. So just because a business is seeking those celebrity endorsements doesn't automatically mean that it's repositioning. It could just be a normal kind of thing in its strategy. But sometimes when a business is in that decline phase or that post maturity phase, it specifically needs to look at avenues in that marketing realm to appeal to new people, and celebrity endorsements is one of those. Attempting different promotional techniques or developing a memorable catchphrase can also be potential strategies. So trying to use those marketing strategies to appeal to new consumers. Maybe a business wants to show that it's more sustainable, more environmentally conscious, and perhaps it would create some kind of catchphrase to reflect that, with the view that that would be appealing to a wider target market by capturing those people who value that idea of sustainability in business. And lastly, we've got operations. So operations repositioning is about improving productivity and including minimizing expenses, refining quality, using technology, and keeping up with demand. So that example that I gave before about Woolworths and using AI in that recruitment process, it also is something that falls under operations too. So you can see that there are overlaps here as well. That was a HR example, and it's also an operations example because it is how the business is running. It's a strategy that is impacting the operations of the way that the business does things. So some examples of repositioning strategies: you could develop an app, and so of course that can give better customer experience. It gives you more of an ability to keep up with competitors who may have similar things. And you could also relocate or conduct a minor expansion or renovation to whatever shop front or whatever facility you may have, even warehouses and things like that, to make things faster. Perhaps all those big companies that have lots of logistical kind of things they have to figure out. So companies like Woolworths, like Amazon, that do lots of shipping and lots of transportation of goods, that kind of thing may they may reposition by having those expansions to better to improve the offerings that they have. So something you may be wondering is what the difference is between rebranding and repositioning. So rebranding is probably something that we've heard of before, and it's relating specifically to the marketing function that we just spoke about. And so if a business chooses to reposition in the market, rebranding may occur as part of the strategy. Like we just saw, marketing is one of our 4 key business functions, but there are the 3 other ones as well. And those other 3 are falling under the banner of repositioning as well, but not under the banner of rebranding. So repositioning has that greater scope and it can impact all 4 business functions. It doesn't have to, but it can. So human resources, marketing, operations, and finance. Now, some examples of this, if we look at Virgin Australia as our case study. So back in 2020, when it was struggling with the voluntary administration, it changed its fares, which is a finance repositioning strategy, and reduced flight offerings. So not having as many flights or as many flight paths. And that's an operations strategy, something that the business is doing differently with the way that it runs. So you've got 2 things there, and that makes it repositioning. In opposition to that, we've got rebranding. In 2011, it changed its name from Virgin Blue to Virgin Australia. We can see those logos there, and you may remember back in the days of Virgin Blue. But that is purely a marketing strategy. It didn't impact those other areas of finance and human resources and things. So that was just rebranding with that niche of marketing. So influences on repositioning, we've got plenty of these. And one thing that we can think about here is sustainability. So lots of businesses are going to pursue minimizing those negative impacts that humans have on the world. We see that more and more these days, with sustainability being something that's always at the forefront of business news. So this is all about thinking about future generations during that strategic planning and still meeting their own needs as well, though. So with sustainability, you have that balance between needing to make sure that the business is still running, is still doing well financially, but you're doing all of that while being sustainable. So we've got all these different sustainability strategies we can think about in all of these different spaces. So human resources, we've got career planning, employment growth opportunities, and outsourcing. Marketing, we've got product packaging, innovation, and prioritizing relationship marketing. Operations is something that we probably think of first when we think of sustainability, things like reducing emissions and minimizing waste. Management, we could have globalization opportunities. Corporate social responsibility is a big one as well that we'll look at shortly. And finance can also come into this as well. So a common misconception with sustainability is that it's only about the environment, and that's not true. So there's actually different layers of sustainability. Environment is definitely one of them, but you've also got the social aspect of sustainability as well, and um, you've got other elements in there too. So keep that in mind when thinking about sustainability, because yes, we do hear a lot about, for example, car manufacturers wanting to reduce emissions, um, and lots of government organizations as well wanting to reduce emissions as part of their political strategies. But you want to be sustainable in terms of society, so that can factor in things like health and that kind of thing as well. Sustainability is about that long-term viability as well. So, corporate social responsibility, which we just mentioned then. So, this is this idea that businesses are expected to contribute constructively to society, and that can happen in multiple different ways: economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic. And this is called corporate social responsibility. So, oftentimes, when people hear this, they probably think of philanthropy, so being a good corporate citizen, making donations, and all of those sorts of things. But it does have these other levels as well. And we can see in this diagram here um, some of the levels as well. So the bottom half, or the bottom section, is required by society. So we need businesses to be profitable, because without that, then it can't be a business anymore. So that's a requirement. Legal responsibilities as well. You have to obey the law as a business. Um, and so this is about right and wrong. Of course, if you're doing the wrong thing in business, then you can have lots of problems. And so those two things are a requirement. Then we go up a level to what's expected by society. So ethical responsibilities: do what is just and fair and avoid harm. So if we think about the treatment of workers, fair wages and good working conditions, and all of those things that are under that ethical kind of banner, that is what society expects. It's not necessarily a requirement. Of course, there are businesses out there that do the wrong thing, but it is what most people expect from the businesses that we have in our society. And then desired by society, which is that philanthropic element um, of donating, of even fundraising, of supporting different causes. So you've got the really base things that are just operating a business that's financially viable and obeys the law. You've got operating a business that's ethical and fair. And then you've got that step up at the very top where you're looking at actually giving back as well. So some influences on repositioning. So ethical standards are the series of moral-based principles a business is obligated to comply with. And so complying with these is about preserving those relationships with stakeholders. And remember that stakeholders can be anyone who's impacted by the business or who impacts the business, can be customers, suppliers, um, the government, all of those different people who are in the mix. So things like fairness, respect, confidentiality, and trustworthiness are some ethical standards that may be present. So large corporations often elect to acquire or merge with a post-mature business to further expand. And so a merger is when two or more companies join to establish a new business. they're merging together to create something new. On the other hand, acquisition involves a business purchasing another organization as a whole. So it's not joining together to create something new, but it's one business having significantly more power and being able to fully purchase that other business. So both of these things are some influences on repositioning. So the ethical standards, the acquisitions, and the mergers. So let's have a look at some examples of acquisitions and mergers. So back in 2022, Qantas acquired the remainder of Alliance's shares. So it already owned some of Alliance Airlines, which we have here in Australia, but it acquired the remainder of those, so it now fully owns that business, just like it owns Jetstar as well. And so that is one business, Qantas, having a lot more power and being able to fully purchase the other business outright. Whereas the merger option we have here, Afterpay and Touch Corp. You may be familiar with Afterpay. They merged to form a $500 million company called Afterpay Touch in 2017. So that is where the businesses are both going to come together to create something new. So you can see that they've got that new business name that's incorporating both businesses in there. And they would merge because of some kind of mutual benefit that they're going to get from that as well. Some more influences on repositioning. So public relations centers around using free promotional techniques aimed at improving a business's reputation and fostering those jointly advantageous relationships between the business and the market. So we want everyone to be benefiting in this public relations relationship. Crisis management is the process of handling a negative event that wasn't predicted, it wasn't expected in any way, and it's a series of strategies to minimize the damage that the business suffers as a result. So a very good example of that is Dreamworld. So they had a crisis back years ago now where they had the malfunction of the Thunder River Rapids ride, and that wasn't handled as well as it probably could have been by Dreamworld and the parent company, Ardent Leisure. So that is about making sure that you're balancing between taking responsibility for the fact that something has happened that's really awful under your watch, but then also not taking responsibility in the sense that the investigation hadn't happened yet. They weren't sure what caused the issue. So that's where public relations comes in, and you need to manage the situation to try and make sure that the business doesn't completely suffer as a result of that crisis. So you've got something to remember with public relations. There's the misconception, I suppose, that it is all about just helping the business, promoting the business, and that kind of thing. But remember that idea of it's jointly beneficial for both the business and the customers or those other stakeholders who are involved in that relationship. So some HR and operational strategies that can happen when you're in that post-maturity stage can be, so one of them is redundancy. And this is probably something that we are already familiar with just from our everyday lives and the news, particularly in that COVID-19 period. So when an employee is made redundant, this means that their position in the organization is no longer necessary for that business to operate. So they are then dismissed as a result. They're not needed, so they are no longer going to have that job anymore. So redundancy isn't just like being fired, because it does involve the employer paying out that redundant employee as a form of compensation for that job loss. So you may hear of people being given that option to take a redundancy. Maybe if their job is sort of a bit unstable with the business environment, um, an employer might decide to offer redundancies to employees, um, and that employee may choose to take that payout, seeking a more stable job while getting that little influx of money to tide them over until they find that next role. So the payment that an employee gets is going to vary according to the experience of the employee, among some other factors as well. So if you're a brand new employee, then you probably aren't going to get any redundancy payout or very little. Whereas someone who's been at the business for a long time is going to have lots of experience there. They're probably more highly ranked, and that's going to attract more compensation for that job loss. So, in an example, and there are lots of examples that we could think of here, in 2020, the National Rugby League, the NRL, announced that it would make 25% of its staff redundant to save some money. So that was back when COVID-19 was really impacting all sectors and people weren't able to attend games. And so businesses and organizations like the NRL had to think about how they could remain financially viable. And in this case, they chose to make some employees redundant. So if we think about things like going from 2 referees to 1 referee, um, and then also all of the different employees that they would have at levels that you may not sort of hear about in the news. So the NRL would have lots of people who go out to schools and do workshops on rugby league to get people interested and to play the sport. And a lot of those employees lost their jobs during that time. Now we've got 2 other human resource strategies and operational strategies. So this is again that crossover between human resources and operations, because it's about the people in the organization, but it's also about the way that the business functions and those operational kind of factors. So retraining is about employees being educated more in the activities that they have to perform as part of their position. So perhaps if you are part of a business that gets a new piece of technology, it expands in some way, that may mean that you need to learn something new in order to fulfill your role. So employees can become more motivated and more capable of performing their tasks really well, and that can increase the efficiency in the business. So that's a positive outcome of retraining. But at the same time, retraining does have some negatives where it can be costly depending on what it is, and also time consuming as well. So it can limit the business's capacity to hire new staff. If you've just done a whole round of retraining employees and then you lose some employees or you need to hire new employees, then that can be really time consuming. You've just gone through this whole phase of retraining, but then you've got new employees and you need to train those people as well. Now, development is different to retraining. This is more of a one-on-one approach. So it's focusing on each employee establishing a plan in conjunction with the employer. So they're working together, and it's going to enable them to develop in their career and improve their ability to conduct their role within the business. So maybe if we think of retraining, if you've got a supermarket and it decides to add an in-store cafe, maybe someone who works at the checkout would need to retrain to learn how to do a barista role as well. Whereas development is about those one-on-one plans between the employer and the employee to think about their careers and how they're going to work to develop their skills in their career trajectory. So something that you'll need throughout business in every unit is your analytical tools. So you need to be able to select important information about the business that you are focusing on in the assignment or exam that you have. And then you need to interpret that information to draw those conclusions about the implications of repositioning strategies in this case. So in other units, you'll be focusing on other things with that interpretation aspect. And in this case, though, you're looking at the implications of repositioning strategies. So this is what the strategy is and what does it mean? What will result following that strategy's execution? So these are the analytical tools that you may have already learnt or you may learn in the coming months, depending on where you're at. Now, keep in mind that you're not necessarily going to be assessed on all of these, because usually each piece of assessment is going to include two, sometimes even just one. You'll notice in each section here we've got three though, and so there's never really enough room in any of your assessment pieces to assess you on all three. So depending on the exam writers for the external exam, they will choose two for you to be assessed on, and equally your school teachers who write your internal pieces of assessment will choose ones that you need to do, or you'll have the ability to choose them yourself depending on the way that they've written your piece of assessment. So depending on where you're at in your business journey, you may be up to Unit 4, Topic 1, which is what we're covering today. If you haven't gotten to that point yet, then you'll be on Unit 3, Topic 2. So, of course, we can see in each of these sections, we've got the SWOT analysis. So hopefully you're pretty familiar with that already. But if you're not confident with it, then we are going to go through it today. And then steeple analysis, that's something that I mentioned earlier with a strategy to remember your macro environmental factors is using that steeple acronym. Socioeconomic, technological, environmental, economic, political, legal, and ethical. And then Porter's 5 forces. This will be something that's new in this unit because it hasn't popped up before. So let's have a look at some of these in greater depth. So the SWOT analysis. This is about looking at two areas of the business. So the internal area where you're looking at strengths and weaknesses. So what does the business do well? and what advantages does it have over competitors? And then on the other hand, what does it lack or do poorly? And what disadvantages does the business have compared to competitors? And then you're looking at the external opportunities and threats. So, is there increasing demand for products or services offered by the business or not offered by the business? So, the business could expand into that area to make use of that increased demand. Do expansion opportunities exist? And can the business invest in new technologies? That's something that we see all the time. Things like artificial intelligence and all of those technologies that are emerging along with that, they are opportunities that businesses can take advantage of to improve efficiency, improve their offerings for customers and the experience that customers have. And threats, you're always thinking about competitors here. What competitors does the business have? What are they doing? Where are we positioned as opposed to them? But then, in addition to competitors, also just those macro environmental factors. So, what changes in the business environment could negatively impact the business? And again, looking at that steeple analysis acronym, those factors are what you would be considering there. So maybe a new law has been brought in and that could negatively impact the business. Maybe a new technology has been released and that could negatively impact the business if it doesn't take advantage of it, or perhaps a technology can take away jobs and that may impact a business, for example. Also, if you think of the environment as well, which is a big one, there are lots of environmental things that could and do impact businesses. So, needing to respond to people increasingly being aware of the environment and our impact on it. If a business like a mining company, for example, has a negative impact on the environment, then they may need to think about how that's going to affect them moving forward. Now let's have a look at the steeple analysis. This is building on that SWOT analysis because usually it allows us to go into more depth and pick apart things into these different categories. So this is about external environmental forces that influence a business, and we're able to analyze that using this template. So here we've got examples for each of the different categories to get you thinking. So in the socio-cultural strategy section, this is all about people and their values and the way that things are working in society in that socio-cultural space. So Walida is a business that creates different products like creams and things like that. So it created a niche market. So a niche market is that small segment of a market that not many others or no others have taken advantage of, and it's attracting consumers who prefer those natural products that are environmentally friendly. And here we can easily see as well that crossover between these. So yes, that is about that people and their values value those natural products and things like that. But we've got a crossover there very clearly with the environmental section as well, because of that appealing to those environmentally friendly values that people have. Technological, so Pokemon Go uses augmented reality. That is a technology that the business is taking advantage of. Economic, So Dr. Bronner's another sort of environmentally sustainable kind of business that creates things like soaps and creams and things like that. So it has a strategy where it limits its executives' salaries to 5 times that of the lowest paid employees. So sometimes we hear about businesses who pay their top executives millions and millions of dollars, and then you hear about them paying people who are low down in the business hierarchy, um, not even adequate wages according to those award rates. So this is that strategy that the business is using that's economic to make sure that it's a fair system for the way people are paid. And again, that has a bit of crossover with other sections as well. We can think that that goes into that socio-cultural aspect because it's looking at values and people and things like that. It's also legal and ethical too, because it's important to meet those award wages for employees. And ethically, people want to see businesses, like we spoke about earlier, um, treating people correctly with wages and with working conditions and all of those factors. Environmental, the Very Good Bra, which is a sustainable kind of organization that makes bras that are completely sort of without wasteful materials. It has that offering of compostable bras, so you're not going to throw it out and it goes into landfill and contributes to environmental problems. So that's where that fits into that environmental space. Political. So Coca-Cola decreased its bottle size and increased prices because of the UK government's sugar tax a few years ago now. So that is an example of how those external environmental forces, in this case the political decisions of the government, are impacting the business and the way that they operate. So Coca-Cola changed the way it's operated because of that political environment. In the legal section, laws prohibiting advertising and age limits for purchasing cigarettes. So this was a long while ago now where we had that change where those big tobacco companies were no longer allowed to have fancy packaging that were attracting people to the products. Now we see warnings on our packaging for cigarettes to try and get people to not take up smoking. Ethical, lastly, so pay rates for food delivery drivers. That is something that we hear about quite often, where people in those sorts of roles don't have those fair wages and don't have rights. So we hear about people who have accidents because they're on a bike or a scooter delivering goods to people, delivering food and that kind of thing. But then they don't have the right kind of payment and the right rights within the business to make that an ethical kind of business. So in your steeple analysis, you would always be looking at one business and thinking about the strategies that it has and the external environmental forces that influence it. So something to keep in mind is that things, as I mentioned earlier, do cross over. So that's where it's best to only put something in once, because if you're in an assignment situation, then you've got a word count to think about. if you're in an exam situation, then you've got a time limit to think about. You don't want to spend time writing things in multiple sections just because they apply to multiple sections. So choose one section, try and choose the one that you think it's most relevant to, and if you can't make that decision, then just choose one, and just put it in that one category. And also keep in mind that sometimes not every category is going to have something relevant. There are lots of situations where there are no things that you can think about for certain categories. Oftentimes you're given stimulus that is really focused around something specific, and that may, for example, be a technological kind of thing, and maybe that has no relation to politics or ethics at all, for example. So, your Porter's five forces analysis. This is something that may be new to you, depending on where you're up to in your studies. So, this is an analysis tool that can be used by post-mature businesses to get a better understanding of the competitive industry that they're in, and it can allow them to reposition more effectively. So, this is part of the sort of research and the strategic planning that they're doing in order to make sure their repositioning is a success. So it involves 2 bargaining powers and 3 threats. So your bargaining powers are your supplier power and your buyer power, and your threats are competitive rivalry, threat of substitution, and threat of entry. So, of course, most of these are straightforward based on the names. Suppliers, it's about how powerful the suppliers are in that relationship. The buyers, that's referring to consumers. Competitive rivalry is that business to business rivalry. Threat of substitution is the threat of customers going between businesses, and the threat of entry is a new business coming into the mix to create a more saturated, competitive situation in the business environment. So, supplier power, we can think about something like, for example, all of the supermarkets that rely on the suppliers to make sure that they've got all of the products that people want. So the capacity of those suppliers to influence a business's pricing by raising the costs of the goods that they provide. So factoring into that is how many suppliers there are. So if a supermarket, for example, is going to have probably quite a number of suppliers, if your business as the supplier increases its prices a lot, then that supermarket may have that ability to go to a different supplier, and that would mean that they have the power, and the supplier has low supplier power. On the other hand, if a business is really niche, it offers something that other businesses want, but no one else provides, then it's going to have far more supplier power because the other businesses don't have any other options. They can't choose to go elsewhere. And so they're at the mercy of that business and the way that it chooses to price its goods. Buyer power is the level of influence of the consumers. So that can also be about prices, and it has that interrelationship with the threat of substitution, where you've got the idea of customers being able to substitute one business for another. So going between different supermarkets, for example. Competitive rivalry, of course, is about that business to business rivalry, the tactics that each business uses to try and get that competitive advantage in the market. and the threat of entry. So again, if we think of this supermarket angle, we've got the idea that new supermarkets could be coming in from overseas. And so years ago, back when Aldi came into the mix, that was relating to that threat of entry. So here are some questions that you can be asking for each of these different categories. So for supplier power, how dependent is the business on suppliers? How many alternative suppliers are available? How affordable are those alternative suppliers? And how easy is it to transfer um, between suppliers? So that's something to really keep in mind and not forget when you're thinking about this, because yes, maybe the business does have lots of other options of suppliers. Maybe they are far more affordable and would be far better, but perhaps it would have some kind of contract with its current supplier that would make transitioning to that new supplier really complicated. So that factors into that supplier power as well. Buyer power, that's how many customers are affiliated with the business, how many customers exist in the overall market. So there's going to be some people who go to Woolies, some people who go to Coles, some people who go to Aldi. So the first is about people who are affiliated with one of those businesses, and the second is about the overall market, all of the people who buy food from supermarkets. How sensitive are customers to pricing changes? That's a big one that we're seeing with the cost of living. And so buyer power would mean if customers have the ability to influence the way that businesses are pricing their goods. So they could be boycotting the business and trying to get them to reduce prices that way. They could be taking legal action and things like that. And then how easily can those customers switch to competitors? Again, this factors into the threat of substitution as well. That's the basis of that one. So competitive rivalry, how many competitors exist? You can have a duopoly, for example, where you've only got two big businesses that dominate in the market. For example, Qantas and Virgin. How dominant is the business in the market? And what tactics are those rivals employing to get that competitive advantage? Threat of substitution, how many substitutes exist? How can the business retain its customers? And how does the business compare to those potential substitutes? And it can be in terms of affordability, but it can be in terms of other things as well. Customer satisfaction, its reputation for customer service and being ethical, and all of those other things that go into our decision making when it comes to choosing one business over another, or choosing to leave one business for another. And then threat of entry. What are the capital and legal requirements of entering the industry? So sometimes, particularly in Australia, we've got lots of rules around businesses coming in from overseas, for example. And so if those requirements are really stringent and time consuming and expensive, then that's going to reduce that threat of entry, because the threat of those businesses coming in is less as a result of the difficulty that they would face in coming in to the Australian market. What is the level of saturation in the market? So if the business environment is already really saturated, then it's going to be less likely that other competitors are going to enter the market, because they're not going to be able to be financially viable. because they're not going to have enough of a customer base to sustain them. How profitable is the industry? And what are the impediments that may curb the emergence of new competitors? So again, that idea of all of the requirements that they may face to come into the industry, the different cost factors, and yes, particularly in Australia, we do have lots of rules around licensing and things like that. So there have been businesses from overseas in that supermarket sector that have wanted to come into Australia and haven't, because of those restrictions and also the market domination of those existing competitors. The decision-making matrix is also something that you may not be familiar with. So this is sort of combining the idea of analysis with evaluation. You can see we've got those evaluation criteria that we will go through shortly as well. So it's a visual representation of that evaluation process. So it's in the form of a table like the one we've got here, and it's used to assess and rate the different options available to a business in order to reach a decision as to which option should be selected. So again, when you're thinking about repositioning, there could be two different repositioning strategies, and you would put those down in the left-hand column of this table, and then you would be looking at the different evaluation criteria. In this case, we've got competitiveness, effectiveness, and stakeholder satisfaction, and thinking about how you would rate those out of 5 and why you would rate them that way. So maybe one strategy is going to rate far better than the other in terms of competitiveness because it's something that no one else is doing and it's going to really set the business apart. So if we'll have a look at an example of this in an assignment context shortly as well. But first, let's have a look at the evaluation criteria, some of which we just mentioned then. So competitiveness. Now, these evaluation criteria would be something that you hopefully would be familiar with by now, because this is something that you would have been doing throughout your business studies so far, whenever you're doing that evaluation, be it in an assignment or an exam. So competitiveness is to what degree has the business offered products or services that meet or exceed market standards in relation to other businesses. So you're looking at what other businesses do compared to your business in terms of those products or services, and thinking about who is performing better in those areas. And these definitions are available on the QCEE syllabus, where you can go and look at the syllabus for all of your different subjects. So the syllabus for business is freely available just like the other subjects, and you can find definitions like this one right there for you. Comparisons can be drawn between the business being evaluated and rival companies to indicate the level of competitiveness. So competitiveness is all about those comparisons between the business that you're looking at and the others that are in the industry. There are lots of different factors that can be taken into account here. It's not just about money, it's about other things as well. So market share, general just resources, growth as well, profit, of course, intentions to expand, and the strategies that the business has to drive that competitiveness. So an example that I always like to go to is with, again, the supermarkets. We had Woolworths and Coles years ago now having those mini collectibles series. So Coles released the Little Shop mini collectibles first, and Woolworths really suffered as a result in terms of its financial performance. So it then responded to that fall in competitiveness by releasing its own versions of those collectibles. And since then, we've seen lots of different iterations of those collectibles as well. Stakeholder satisfaction. So, to what degree has the business considered and managed stakeholder expectations in achieving goals or objectives? So, this again, stakeholders is really broad. So it doesn't just mean customers. It can also be internal and broader as well. So employees, and then also investors, suppliers, and management. So when we looked at the internal macro and operating factors earlier, many of these stakeholders fit into those internal and operating categories. Now, stakeholder satisfaction can be measured according to factors like customer base growth, employee retention rates, and continued loyalty and funding from investors. If you are having employees stay with you, then they're probably satisfied. If you've got your customer base increasing, then maybe that's an indicator that not only are your existing customers staying with you, but maybe they are generating that word of mouth where they're spreading the word about your business and helping you increase your customer base. Effectiveness. So this is all about doing the right thing. So to what degree has the business achieved goals or objectives, and to what extent has the business solved targeted problems? Now, this can really be applied to any business strategy. It's one of those ones that is really versatile like that. And it is all about those goals and reaching those goals. As opposed to this, efficiency is not doing the right thing, but doing things in the right way. So, to what degree has the business optimized its use of resources and its application of processes in achieving goals or objectives? So, for example, efficiency, we often think of time and effort and money that might be required to do something. So, if a business is really streamlined in all of its systems, then it's going to be an efficient business. So now let's have a look at your IA3, which is going to be a feasibility report. Again, this may be coming up in this next semester, in this next term, or it may be the term after. It all depends on where your school is up to. But regardless, this is still going to be coming your way at some point. So I encourage you to get an understanding of what you're in for, and that way you can really start getting prepared early. So it's 1,500 to 2,000 words, just like all of your business assignments will be in years 11 and 12. So you're looking at repositioning a business in the post-maturity stage. And so in relation to that, you're going to be describing business environments and situations, explaining business concepts, strategies, and processes relating to influences for repositioning in the post-maturity stage. You're going to select data and information to analyze the business situation using those analytical tools that we looked at. So that could be the SWOT analysis, the steeple analysis, or Porter's 5 forces. You're going to then interpret the relationships, patterns, and trends that may emerge from that data that you've selected. And using that, you're going to draw conclusions about the implications of repositioning a business. You're going to evaluate the repositioning strategies to make decisions and propose recommendations. And all of this is going to be done through that feasibility report format. And it's going to be that formal kind of report where, for example, it may be targeted at the manager of that business, because they are who would need to know about the feasibility of the strategy that they're considering. So next up, we're going to have a look at an example of an IE3 task. So this is the assignment that I completed when I was in year 12. We did it on Everfresh. So Everfresh is a repositioned version of Cornet Super IGA. And so Cornet Super IGA had that repositioning strategy where they changed to become Everfresh Food Market, and again, this is the supermarket industry, so we can understand that they are facing lots of competition. So this was a repositioning strategy to try and resituate itself in the competitive market. So first of all, you need a title page in your report. This is something that's going to always fall into that communication criterion. Usually the last one you'll see in those criteria sheets you'll have, where you need to have the formatting correct. So a title page is part of that. Your name, the business's name, sometimes the logo, try and make it look professional is best. And then on your next page, you want your table of contents and your table of figures, if applicable, as well. So you want to list each section title with the page number. So this is something that you can just automatically generate in whatever software you use to write your assignment, whether it be a Word document or a Google Doc or something similar. And list each table with a page number. So with the figures, you're going to be looking at those different analytical tools you may have done, the decision-making matrix. You may have some kind of summary of the key business strategies that the organization has employed in that repositioning that you're looking at. And so all of those figures that you'll have need to be documented in that table of figures. So first off, we'll have a look at the introduction. So this is where you're looking at those describing and explaining criterion. So you're thinking about what is just the basic background of the business and trying to explain that in that concise format. An introduction is really important with providing that context, but you don't want to spend way too long just describing and explaining, because that's not going to leave you room for that higher order thinking with analysis and evaluation. So here we've got even just basic information like how long the business has been operating for, where has it been operating. Of course, you need to use that business terminology. So the post-maturity stage is something that you'll definitely be using as a term in this assignment. And operating and macro environmental factors. So again, all of those things that you learn about in business, everything that we've covered today, everything that will be in your school textbooks and hopefully your school notes as well. Those are the terms that then should be included in your IA3 and equally in other pieces of assessment as well. So we're saying what the factors are, operating and macro, and what they caused. So a slight decline in sales, when it was, so this was late 2018. And then we've got this idea of introducing repositioning as the strategy that we're looking at. And then just outlining the purpose of the report. The feasibility of 2 strategies implemented to counteract the business's decline following a name transformation to Everfresh. So we've got that basic introduction with how old is the business, what date is this happening, what is causing the decline, what will the report be about. Then you've got more of an ability to go into depth in the next section, which is the current situation. So we mentioned very briefly the idea of Everfresh in that introduction, but we definitely need to build on that more. So it was rebranded to Everfresh for several reasons, and then you're outlining those reasons. Eager to trial repositioning strategies on a reasonably stable store. You're giving some statistics as well. So you can see how we've got some more information about the sales decline. We mentioned again very briefly and generally in the introduction that sales had declined, but this is where we're providing more information with the hard facts. So marginal 2% sales decline, and $1.1 million in expenditure on revitalizing the business. We're looking at lease renewal, why the business was selected for the repositioning strategy. That is the current situation in this case. And you can see all of those little numbers that are floating around next to all of those facts we've got. That was my system of referencing for my assignment. So I had those numbers there, and then at the end of the assignment in my reference list, I had each of those numbers with the corresponding reference of where I got that information from. Make sure that you follow whatever your school requires for the referencing style. Different schools may have different requirements there, so it's important that you are following what your school wants. Continuing on with the current situation, and we can see here the criteria as well that the assignment needs to try and meet. So accurate recognition of significant and relevant business facts and characteristics. Comprehensive descriptions of the business, environment and situation relating to the repositioning. Remember that the repositioning is what you're looking at here. You don't want the life story of the business. That's just not relevant at all to what's currently happening with that repositioning. And again, the business terminology always comes up here. So make sure that you use all of those terms. Market share, saturated market, competitive environment, hostile, all of those different words that you will have been exposed to throughout your business studies. So identification of elements of the business concepts, strategies, and processes relating to the repositioning. All of those are covered in this sort of section where you're outlining those background things. So here we've got recognition that it operates in that hostile competitive environment. Again, supermarkets, very saturated industry. And then we're going into more depth there, looking at who the competitors are and how many stores they have. And then going into detail with some statistics around the market share of the business and how it relates to other businesses comparatively in terms of that market share. So all of those yellow bits that are highlighted there, they are examples of using that business terminology that we can see crops up in the criteria a lot. The current situation again, so this is, as you can see, quite a long section that you need to go into. It, of course, is going to vary depending on the information that you have at your disposal and the particular business that you're looking at. So here we're going into some more depth with the sort of demographics and those sorts of things with the location. So population of Bundaberg and comparison between that and Queensland. And then disposable income, because that is, of course, going to impact how much money they have to spend on groceries, what kind of supermarkets they're willing to go to based on the sort of price point that they have. Unemployment as well, in addition to that disposable income. So you can see that we've looked at the business specifically with the market share, the sales, and factors like that. And then we're also broadening out to look at that business environment with location and other factors that impact the way that the business operates and how well it operates. So in pink, we've got describing that business environment, and in yellow, again, those terms with the business terminology that you need. So next up, after the current situation, you've got the summary of some key business functions strategies to reposition the business. So here we've broken it up. We've got all four that are applying. Keep in mind that you may not have all four that are applicable. It does depend on the particular strategy that you're looking at and the business that you're looking at. For marketing, there's usually going to be something that's happened with the repositioning. So it can be adopting a new logo, it can be social media changes, advertising, and all of those elements of marketing. Operations, so in this case, a change of the store layout, new racking and floors and things like that. An in-store cafe, so of course that impacts operations, and again has flow-on effects on things like human resources. And stocking more fresh and locally grown produce is another operational strategy. Finance, so just in this case, we've got that overarching amount that they've spent on repositioning, $1.1 million. And in human resources, we've got multi-skilled pre-existing staff. So that idea of retraining that we looked at earlier, we've got people who are already in the business. Maybe they work at the checkout, and then they need to learn how to work in a cafe kind of environment as well. Employing new people as well. Sometimes you may be retraining existing employees. Sometimes you may need to also bring in new employees entirely who are specialists in some area. Hiring employees suited to the business's focus on fresh as well. And they wanted people who are aggressive in pursuing sales, because that's something that they identified as important. You can see here as well, in this assignment, you will be getting some stimulus to work with. And so you can see how I've got in brackets the different sources that I'm getting information from, in addition to those little numbers that are indicating where to go to in the reference list to find the citation. Then we've got Porter's 5 forces, the first of our analytical tools in this case. And we've got the different categories. So first of all, I've got the evaluation. What is the level of power? So moderate to high supplier power, high buyer power, very high competitive rivalry. So making that judgment and then building on it by actually supporting it with whatever evidence led you to that decision. You don't want to just make a judgment call without having that backup to show how you're justifying that evaluation. And then the last two, we've got threat of substitution and threat of entry. So this can be information that is directly from the business. It can be research as well. So a feasibility report is going to involve research. So in this case, for example, I found that CanStar Blue did a survey and found that 28% of respondents said that they are loyal to one supermarket, while 10% switched to a different supermarket in the last year. So that relates to that idea of how likely it is that people are going to substitute one business for another. SWOT analysis. So again, you can see the different criteria that are relevant for each of these things at the top there. So significant and relevant relationships, patterns and trends, interpretation of the effects on the business situation, and you're drawing some conclusions as well. So some strengths: aggressive in sales, more autonomy in management compared to competitors, a smaller business that has less layers, less complicated. Weaknesses: they don't have a deli. That caused some customer dissatisfaction. So you can see how we're providing more information than just saying exclusion of deli. We're giving a little bit more context to explain why we've included that in this case. Why is it a weakness? Opportunities: opening additional stores, selling unique products. Threats: you're looking at coronavirus in this case was something that was big, that impacted the business during that stage of repositioning. Decision-making matrix. So here we've got the two strategies. One strategy is selling more fresh food from local suppliers, and we've chosen our three different types of evaluation criteria: competitiveness, effectiveness, and stakeholder satisfaction. And then you're giving the evidence in those categories related to that strategy. So effectiveness, 6% growth, that's an indicator of effectiveness. Sales increasing by 10%, that is an indicator of something being effective. Effectiveness is a pretty straightforward one. Stakeholder satisfaction, so criticism from customers for cutting the grocery line with the number of items available. Competitiveness, so what is the business doing compared to others in the industry? We've got a 50-50 split between fresh produce and non-perishables in Everfresh, whereas other competitors have got that 30-70 arrangement. And then looking at the second strategy, we've got opening earlier with the inclusion of a coffee shop and trolleys that have a coffee cup holder. So the first one was all about local produce, and this one is all about appealing to people who want that coffee shop offering as well. So competitors have different requirements under the different legislation. So that's something I mentioned in that competitiveness section. Effectiveness, you've got media exposure, you've got the amount of time people would spend at Everfresh on average, and then evaluating that. So thinking about not just mentioning what it is, but building on it by saying that actually isn't enough time for someone to buy a coffee, and that's a reflection on the strategy, suggesting that it's not effective. Evaluation. So after you've done that table of your decision-making matrix, you also want to have a discussion section about that to further talk about the findings as well. And that is done here. And in pink, we've got using that research and those statistics to support the ideas. Everything that you say you want to try and justify, you're looking really in depth and you're doing that research to support what you're saying. Again, more discussion on the decision-making matrix. So here we've got some conclusions that we're drawing. So for example, that 15-minute average visit time that we saw in the decision-making matrix, we're picking that out and mentioning it here. It suggests that time constraints may be attributable for lack of interest in engaging in the cafe. Mentioning potential solutions. So could implement a full cafe and eatery to gain a more notable strategic advantage over competitiveness, but then also considering the implications of that potential solution. Divergence from the core supermarket business may be a problem in that case. And then, of course, recommendations. You need to be thinking about what is the best option. What would you advise the business to do? So often it's not going to be a really straightforward decision. So it's always good to acknowledge that conflicting evidence, but then provide your reasoning and your evidence for the decision that you've made, and clearly stating your recommendation. It is advised that the business does this. And continuing on here, we've got more in that recommendations section. You're providing an example and reasoning. And this is something that I found through research. So it's a strategy that I'm suggesting. So Everfresh should invest in emerging technologies. And then I'm giving a really specific example with a company that they could invest in there. And lastly, we've got more of the same thing, more reasoning and evidence for everything, backing up things, more acknowledgement of conflicting evidence, more statistics, and then clear recommendation as well. And then you have your concluding part as well. You want to wrap things up, make your recommendation really clear, and always have the reasoning to support that. So some tips and advice to finish off for today. So your recommendations in your feasibility report need to come from your analysis and be supported by the research that you've done. So don't just pull things out of thin air. You need to always justify everything that you come up with. Even if you're not really sure, if it's a bit of a grey area, as long as you have something to back up your decision, then that is good in this case. In your analytical tools, you should have identified things that the business can improve on, things the business is doing right, and opportunities the business can take advantage of. So if you just think of the SWOT analysis, that's something that you really clearly do in that analysis tool. And those are those aspects that you can then draw from to build your recommendation list. With the communicating criterion, part of this is referencing. It's really important that you start to practice this if you're not already feeling confident with it. So this is the system that I used in Year 12. I would have a bit of a coding system where I would keep track of the references that I used so I could easily put them in for my final submission. I would have a code, the title, the author, the date, the URL, the date accessed. You don't even need all of those details. You could just have the code and then the URL. And then when you go to do your referencing, you would need to go back to that URL and find that additional information so you can do your referencing properly. Using those codes, you can then make up tables. You can have notes for different ideas. So if you're looking at the financial situation of the business, you could have a heading for that, and then you could insert your notes and the reference where you got those notes from. Using the syllabus as a guide is something that I can't recommend enough. You can scan the QR code that's there to go straight to the QCEE website, and that'll show you the business syllabus that's downloadable there in PDF format. Research, even when it isn't compulsory. This assignment you definitely do need to research, and that is always going to allow you to have better recommendations and a better overview of the business and understanding of the business situation. Make sure that you take advantage of the drafting process. So submit a draft for your teacher's feedback, and I always like to treat the draft as the final submission. I would want to make it as best as I could, and that way I could get feedback on my best effort, so I could really understand where I was sitting and what I needed to improve on. If you don't put enough effort into that draft, then you're not getting the full value from that, and not understanding if putting your full effort into it would allow you to get a good result. Again, always use the business terminology, and you can take hints from all of those different sources. Textbooks, the syllabus is a great one, your teacher, and these lecture slides as well. Make use of the full word limit. It is 1,500 to 2,000 words for this assignment, but really 2,000 words is something that you should be aiming for, because there's always enough stuff to talk about. And if you're not meeting that, then potentially you're not going to be able to meet the criteria to the best of your ability. Develop that system to record your references and maintain it. So mine was just a suggestion, but if you've got your own system, then keep using that. Or if you haven't got one, then come up with something that works for you. Referencing is something that's really important from an ethical point of view, and from the marker's perspective as well. Think deeply about what the business is doing, how, why, and in what environment, and the flow-on effects of this. Everything that you think about, you need to be really drilling down, and that will help you have better insights in your assignment and better recommendations. Keep track of things that are happening in the business world as well, and that will allow you to have a better understanding of things, and it will also be really helpful in exams where you can do with having those examples of real world businesses. And proofreading and editing is something that I'm really passionate about, so I can't recommend that enough. Make sure that you get all of your spelling and grammar right. It's something that should be far more straightforward than other things. When you get a criteria sheet and you see those aspects of the communication criterion, it should, you know exactly what that is, you know exactly how to achieve it, so that should be hopefully more straightforward than those other aspects. Thank you so much for coming along to our lecture today. I hope that it was helpful for you. I definitely encourage you to go and check out those resources I outlined at the start of today's lecture, including the business course notes that I wrote for this subject. Good luck with the rest of your subjects and the rest of your studies, and I hope to see you at future lecture series. Thank you, everyone. Bye.